Welcome to the Gyandut channel, an initiation by the Department of College Education, Rajasthan. I am Sareen, and today the topic under discussion is a prose piece in praise of ignorance. This is penned by the 20th century writer Hilaire Belloc. He was born in a village outside Paris and later on became naturalized British citizen. Belloc is a gifted, skilled prose writer who has written essays, novels, poetry, travels, history, biography, and criticism. His Path to Rome is a travelogue. Mary Antoinette and History of England are books of history. He was also editor of the political weekly Eyewitness. As an essayist, his range is very wide. Many essays were originally written for newspapers and periodicals, but his prose style is, on the whole, free from journalistic type. And he's very intimate and frank in his essays. He can be playful, tender, emotional, and lyrical in his essays, as well as his humor is never free from satire, and it plays an important part in his plays. His reputation as an essay rests on nothing, on something, on everything. These are his collection of essays. Now, he was friends with another playwright of the 20th century, G.K. Chesterton, who was popular for writing essays full of paradoxes, and with 20th century realistic dramatist George Bernard Shaw, and H.G. Wells, popular for his science fiction. Together, these four friends were called the Big Four of Edward era. The period between 1901 to 1910 is called Edwardian era in literature, as after Queen Victoria's death in 1901, his son Edward VII ruled the throne. The title of the essay startles because in an age when everybody is after the knowledge, the author is writing in praise of ignorance. Although in 20th century, Robert Lind has also written Pleasures of Ignorance, and A.G. Gardiner has written in defense of ignorance. But with the paradoxical title, and in a light and humorous tone, the writer establishes that after reading the essay, you will note he has established with his light, humorous tone that ignorance is not a derogatory term. Rather, it is about knowledge. How much I know is the purpose of gaining knowledge. It is the fact to make better. In praise of ignorance is to make better our ignorance, as Socrates quotes that I know nothing except the fact of my own ignorance. Well, his style is very humorous. He starts the essay with a Miltonic invocation to God. He writes by referring to Erasmus, Renaissance author who wrote in praise of folly. That was a comment, satire on the monks of that time. The essay begins. Erasmus wrote in praise of folly. I, coming exactly 400 years after, would like to write in praise of ignorance. I would like to write a little book about it, just as he did about folly. But I'm handicapped in the first place because we are not free as the men of Renaissance were free. In the second place, I haven't the title. Still, I can, at any rate, write a little article in praise of ignorance. So, help me, God, I will. Now, notice his style. He writes Remark the scope and amplitude of the affair. When he has started writing about ignorance, he says, remark the scope and amplitude of the affair. Let any man, however learned he may think himself, however varied his acquaintance with men, muck, money, and the printed word, set down a list of subjects on which he could competently deal. Then he compares with contrasts metabolism and eutichinism, isostatics, lymphatics, chronology, entomology. The words he used, they themselves, typical words he used, the terms he has used, he stutters. They are full of knowledge also. You, just at the very beginning, you become aware that how much knowledgeable and what a scholar our author is. He writes that when you start writing about how many things you don't know about, after referring to the various terms, he writes that on a map you can know many countries, about towns, but only their name and only their position. Besides that, you don't know anything about the persons. Also, you might be knowing the name only, and you can't be knowing besides their names. Besides giving a lot of difficult terms, he comes to theology, genealogy. He was an expert on a scholar. So his knowledge becomes very difficult for us to understand when he says that consider yourself how much you know about genealogy. What were the maiden names of Charles' first four great grandmothers? And who was the rightful king of England at the present moment because of the doubtful will of Henry VIII? Because the will was many documents, and then a Spanish princess also came as an heir to the throne. So, what was his her claim to the throne, and what was the name of GBD's children? Anyone could write down a top speed half an hour more points of this kind on which he knows nothing. Then he could write down by laborious self examination in a whole day similar points on which he had some little knowledge. So, through the different terms and historical references, as he knows the whole history of England, and he has written history books also. So, referring this, he makes it clear that it becomes very difficult to point out the things on which we know, because there are many things on which we don't know anything. Then he comes to the examination system, and he has presented a very funny scene of the exam system where all the students are sitting on table and a printed paper comes in front of them, and he has said that wretched piece of paper to that question paper. And the way he defines the examiner in the exam and the condition of the examinees, it's a really funny scene in the paper. This is say, he writes, anyone who has sat for an examination has had a vivid revelation of his own ignorance. I have written answers to perhaps 100 examinations in my time, and my attitude towards each of the wretched printed thing as it lay before me. There's a funny things when he writes, I begin then surrounded by dozens of other victims, each at his little desk, with an underpaid invigilator glaring at us from platform above. Was one of violent bewilderment, loss of foothold, sinking into the abyss. I would say something like this. The whole situation which he defines of our examination hall and the questions which he has described, that when such questions come into the exams, discuss the action of Baron Jarius at the Council of Blois, give the principal attempts at the trisection of the plane angle by the epicycloidal method, and mention in their order the places visited by Saint Paul in his nth missionary. The writer says, I knew vaguely what council meant. Vaguely, I knew the meaning because I had been to Blois. But beyond that, I knew nothing. Or again, the second question, he says, I couldn't tell what was the trisection. And the next, about the nth mission, he says, nothing was coming to my mind. Here the author writes, I say that the soul receives a great profit by correction of this kind. No man who has been examined, but have at least come upon the knowledge of his own ignorance, which is the beginning of a learning. So it's a very funny thing that a writer says when you are sitting in the exam and you don't know the questions, at least you become aware about your ignorance at that moment. Then the next scene, which he has described about another student who came for a exam, and these questions were there. Some questions were there, and these three he thought that he will answer these questions. Notice how funny this scene is also. That the questions he has given us. First question was, what do you know of the Council of Chalcedon? Was Solomon justified in the treatment of the Apollinarian? What is the distinction between the Cyprianic and Augustinian attitude towards the Western patriarchs? The essay which talks about the ignorance, you can notice how scholar our author is. The author tells us that he rewrote each of these questions out in a fair, round, clerky hand, leaving a little space blue below each. Then in each of these spaces, जो उसने खाली जगह छोड़ी थी, पहले उसने सारे क्वेश्चन पेपर को देखा, फिर उसको लगा मैं इन तीन का आंसर कर देता हूँ. थोड़ी थोड़ी जगह छोड़ के उसने ये क्वेश्चन लिख दिए और पहले क्वेश्चन का उसने आंसर लिखा, भाई व्हाट डू यू नो ऑफ द काउंसिल ऑफ चेल्सिडन? नथिंग, कुछ नहीं पता गया था. फिर दूसरे का आंसर उसने किया कि वाज सोजोमन जस्टिफाइड था, तो लिखा नहीं. और तीसरे का आंसर उसने लिखा कि एटीट्यूड जो वेस्टर्न पैट्रियार्च का था, आप क्या जानते हो? उसने कहा कुछ नहीं. और इस तरह वो लिख के फटाफट जो अपना क्वेश्चन आंसर है वो एग्जामिनर को दे गया. अब जो यहाँ पे जो कंडीशन जो सीन प्रेजेंट किया गया, दैट इज ऑल्सो वेरी फनी, कि उसके एकदम ये नो नन नथिंग लिख के वो स्टूडेंट तो फटाफट चला गया, लेकिन उसके जो पीछे बैठे हुए स्टूडेंट्स थे वो बहुत हैरान हुए. उनको लगा ओ व्हाट अ इंटेलिजेंट द स्टूडेंट इज. दे फेल्ट जेलस ऑफ हिम. They felt that he has been liberated into the happy sunlight of an Oxford June before them. But the writer tells us that this student failed. After describing these things, the writer comes to a serious note. Now he takes a philosophical turn on the topic ignorance. He says that basically ignorance is the very draft of beatitude. ठंडी हवा का झोंका है. Ignorance. All the mystery and marvel of a white champagne seen from a height at evening depends on our ignorance of the nasty people by which it is inhabited, their torturous and sordid ways. All our loves, all our hero worships, all our dreams of coming peace, all our visions of fortune are the fruits of ignorance. The writer philosophizes that we are able to enjoy our life, we are able to live our life because we are unaware about the future, because we are ignorant what can happen to us, what can happen around us. This is the ignorance which makes life worth living. Next, because we are not aware about what the people think about us, we are enjoying our friends company and we don't know what they think about us, and we leave our friends company happily. So all this is ignorance which makes our life meaningful, easy to live. Again, his style of concluding the essay is ironic, light, humorous. He says, no, to conclude upon a note of grandeur. It's by ignorance alone that we advance through the rough seas of this, our mortal life. The metaphor is not original, I have copied it from others, where not men ignorant of what lay before them, no one would face the adventure. we are able to live life because we are ignorant of the future. So, in the end, he says, in consideration of all this, I thank God for my own ignorance, and though it's unfortunately less than that of the most people, but I flatter myself it will serve. So, hope students, when you go through the text, you will enjoy the text and will really feel surprised that the essay which talks about ignorance is highly scholarly. The terms he has defined, the historical references he has given, the terms he has used are tell how scholar he is, who talks about the person who talks about ignorance, how much he knows. Go through the text and you will enjoy it a lot. And the long questions can be from this essay. The long question can be framed like this about the title, in praise of ignorance, about the appropriateness of the title, and about the proverb that ignorance is bliss. How does Belloc approve or disapprove it? Illustrate your answer by quoting from the text, because we are reading from the exams. Just now we have the funny scenes of the examination hall. So hope you won't have a you don't feel like that, and you don't go through the same traumatic situation. So read the text, understand it for the time being, keep reading, keep listening, keep learning. Thank you, students. Thank you for joining. Thanks a lot.